My name is Tim Hult. I think many of you know me. I was active in town for a long time. I was a selectman for 13 years. I was on the school committee for 6 years, and many other things. I was on the building committees for both of the buildings that are now exist. It really was an honor and a privilege to work for the town of Carlisle. I think we all love Carlisle very much. It's always a challenge to talk about something that people know so well. You all know the town really well. We've recently moved to Concord, and I thought a lot about what makes Carlisle so special, because it is an extraordinary place. Everybody that comes to visit us says this town is beautiful, you know, that it's physically gorgeous in terms of the space, etc. And it is I got to get this right, it is the most educated town in the most educated state, and that comes from measures of number of degrees of people. So it's a very interesting, that doesn't mean we're the most educated town in the country, by the way. I'm sure you all figured that out, right? But it is an extraordinary place that has attracted extraordinary people. And the basis of this talk is, how did that happen? Okay, what was a little farming town in 1950, and we're going to talk about 1950, how did it develop in such a way that the beauty was maintained, that we were able to improve, that we were able to come to a place where it is that most educated town. It's one of the most highly desirable places in the state to live. How did that happen? Okay, and one of the things, what we'll do here is I take 3 snapshots. We talk a little bit about 1950, okay? What was Carlisle like in 1950? And then we move up and talk about 1985, and there's a little bit of a change there. And then we move up and talk a little bit about the way things are right now, okay? So that's sort of the basis of what we're doing. 1950 was really interesting. There were about 800 people in Carlisle in 1950. It was right after the war. The men had almost all the men of the age had gone to the war. Virtually everyone but one came back from the war, okay, and they were ready for life, okay, a quiet life and raising families. There were 275 homes. They were all along most of them were along the arterials, okay, as we know it. The town looked a little bit, much the same, but a little bit different. There were more open fields and then less forest. It was dominated by 3 large dairy farms, and you know who they are, okay? The Farnham Smith's Place, the Great Brook, the Bates Farm, and who was the third one? We all know it. Clark Farm, okay? And they dominated employment, okay? They were the largest employers in town. There were 3 significant buildings that dominated the center. The library, which built in 1895, the Highland School, 1908, and the FRS, which was moved to its current location in 1857. So a lot of that's the same as it is right now, okay? What went on, okay, there was no police station. There were 2 policemen they worked out of the chief's house. There was a small garage for the fire station. It was really volunteer then, okay, with a small garage in the center where the police station is now. The library was a center of activity. The town from the beginning supported the library. There were 6,700 volumes in that library in 1950, which was extraordinary in terms of other towns. Okay, it was a huge amount. The kind of books, they listed all the books in the annual report. They listed all the books they bought that thing. Books like Cheaper by the Dozen, The Finest Hour, Greatest Story Ever Told. These are the books that they bought. And my favorite, American Ferns, which was interesting. The schools, there were 2 schools, only 2 schools. None of the buildings that we now know of as a school were there. There was the Highland School, which we've fortunately preserved, okay, and there was a little brick building next to it. There were about 110 kids in the school, something in that neighborhood, with I think 57 at the high school. And this is an interesting note that will follow through. While there was a great sentiment that while there were only 57 out of the 300 at the high school, the disproportionate number of honors went to the Carlisle kids. Okay, they always said that. What did the kids do? Okay, this is pre-TV, okay, and pre-kids having access to automobiles. There's usually one car if they're, or two if they were lucky, a pickup truck for a household, multiple generations in a household. They did 4-H, okay, they did Boy Scouts, there were movies put on by the church, okay, and contra dances, okay. It was a real close-knit community, okay. They didn't, I will talk about what has happened. Some of the great issues of 1950 where they were talking about traffic, okay. The Rotary had really been put in 1940, okay. In the 40s, the Rotary existed. So they were talking about street signs, and one of the great comments was in Town Report was, well, I guess we need street signs for people who come here. I don't think people here need them at all, okay. And they talked about a playground. We considered a playground, but there's really not much interest in a playground because, you know, in the center. They did work. What they were concerned about, though, was the schools. Okay, there was this central concern for the school because there were 2 grades in each of the 4 classrooms, and then they had their plan for expansion was tenuous. They wanted to use the red brick building for expansion, but they weren't sure because the town population had been 1,800, and it actually had been 800. It actually had been 800 for the previous 30 years. Okay, so they kind of knew something was happening, but they didn't know exactly what to do, and it was a very conservative expenditures, okay, for the town. So, but the concern for the school, at this point, they didn't want the school population to go, classroom size to go over 30 kids. Okay, that was where they were drawing the line. We don't want to go over 30 kids. So they're thinking about that, but very conservative. They were worried about the dump. It was a town dump, and it was filled to capacity. And the great comment was, well, it's over capacity, and we better do something about that before too long. Okay, so those were the kind of discussions. They had great election that year. They turned down lotteries, gambling, horse racing, dog racing, liquor, beer, wine, and package stores. So they just said, we're not doing any of this stuff, right? These discussions sound familiar. And the economics are interesting. I'm going to talk about economics and compare them as we go through. So any guess as to what the town budget was in their dollars? In 1950, the budget of the town was $130,000. Okay, in today's dollars, that would be about, so we can compare, that would be about $1.4 million or about $1,600 per person. Those are today's dollars, but the numbers were a lot smaller. The other thing that we will reference when I talk about the numbers is I use a measure of wealth, okay? And a measure of wealth in terms of the value of the property. Now, I know there are mortgages and I know there are other forms of wealth, but we'll just use that one to compare. The total value of the property in 1950 was about $1.3 million of all the property in town. Okay. Price of a small end new house now, right, in the town. That would work out in, again, converting it to today's dollars, per person, about $16,000 a person. Okay, that was what, this is kind of a feeling of what 1950 were like. Okay, it was a small town, very conservative in financial expenditures, very focused on the schools and education, the library, very much a community, okay, everything, very little reliance on any outside. The counties provided some things, but very little. State provided very little. It was really, you were reliant on yourself and your neighbors, okay? The one thing that I would also say is they had made some decisions, and we'll come back to this. The 1 acre zoning was done in 1930s. Okay, and then in the late 1940s, early 50s, they had the great debate. It was going on right here, and they significantly made the significant restrictions on the commercial enterprises. okay? That looking forward, we didn't want a lot of commercial enterprises. And number two, they moved it to 2-acre zonings. That was done extraordinarily early in terms of, Lincoln was the first, and then Carlisle was one of the second tier of towns that actually put these zoning restrictions in the Commonwealth. So they thought about the way that they were thinking about the way the town looked, they were thinking about the schools, and they were very much committed to this community environment. So let's move on up a little bit to 1985, which we all kind of know well. I think that's probably a time between that time, 1950 and 1985, is probably the time a lot of people here came to the town, okay? And their thoughts that there might be some significant growth were borne out. Okay, the town, excuse me, the town had grown, well, I titled this section Suburban Nation, Suburbanization, and then all hell had broken loose, okay? The population had gone, in 1950, as we said, it was about 800. In 1960, 10 years, it was 1,500. In 1970, it was 2,900. And in 1980, 3,300. So between 1950 and 1985, the population of the town had grown 440%. Okay, you can imagine what this had done in terms of things that have to be accomplished. They were thinking about that small increase to the size of the brick building. There were 3 building projects done in rapid succession, okay? In 1957, the Spalding School was built. In 1963, the Wilkins School was built. In 1968, the Robbins School was built, okay? Because the school population had gone up to 479 kids in 1985. So through that period, there's a constant period of school expansion, okay? You can imagine how long it takes to plan and get these buildings done. The library, again, births. There were 9 in 1950. There were 57 births in 1985. The town has changed a lot. Okay, the library is up to 27,000 volumes. Again, extraordinarily high in terms of a comparable sized town, in terms of the focus on the library. They were worried at that. The discussions in it were obviously about the growth and what they were going to do about this, the schools. The thought then was 2 things. They still thought, even though there were 252 kids in the high school, okay, they still thought a disproportionate number of the honors would go to the Carlisle kids. But they didn't want classes to go over 25. 25 was now the number that class size couldn't go over. Just a side note, I thought it was interesting. In 1985, Alan Cameron was the chairman of the selectmen, okay? And in that year, it's never happened before, there were 4 major building projects going on. Okay, they were the new fire station had just been completed. There was approval for a new police station. There was approval for the renovation of the CPS. Okay, the Carlisle Public Schools, the new buildings that we saw that had just gotten approved, and there were significant renovations going on at the high school. And this is a time when I was starting to get into things in the government, and it was really chaos. Okay. With all of these projects and all of this growth, getting a handle on where we were financially was almost impossible, okay? That we were, in every town meeting, we were voting on a significant building or a significant renovation, and we were, I would have to say, completely on the edge of control, if not in control. But at the same time, what's really interesting about the town is they had continued the focus on the conservation. By this time, a little over 24% of the town had been preserved by land acquisitions that were aided considerably by the generosity of some landowners. Okay, so the major pockets, particularly along the arterials, have been purchased, okay, and the town was digesting those purchases also. And they were aided significantly by the Carlisle Conservation Foundation, which was started during that time. And that stuff was all made more complex by the legislation that was coming out of Massachusetts for the protection EPA regulations and the Rivers Act. So the amount of stress on town government, both in terms of regulation of what you can do and what was needed to do, was enormous. So it was a wild period. It was this incredibly fast growth. And the other things, the things that you can imagine had changes. While there was no TV before, there was multiple TVs in every house. There were multiple cars in every house. The kids were starting to get their own automobiles. The center of focus had changed. The kids, as you all remember, sort of disappeared to Concord, okay, the high school kids at that time. They were much more mobile, but there was still a focus on town activities. Town sports were huge, okay, the cross-country skiing league, the soccer leagues, the town soccer leagues, the town basketball leagues. So there was still this focus on community and the small town community, and we were not seeing the commercialization that many other towns had seen in terms of malls, obviously because of the zoning restrictions. The issues related, when you go over the town report at that time, were all related to building projects, financial, and land acquisitions. Okay, that's sort of what was going on. Okay, and let's talk about the finances. Things had changed a bit there. Okay, the actual town expenditures were $8,600,000 at that time. That in today's dollars was 19 million, 8 million, and 19,300,000. So that number in today's dollars has risen to $5,000 per person. And remember, these are comparable because we did them in standard dollars. So 1950, we spent $1,600 in today's dollars. Now we're spending $5,000 in 1985. Okay, significant jump up. On the other side of that, though, which is really, if we go back to that wealth thing, and you take the total value of the property had increased to $276 million, or over $500 million, $600 million in today's dollars. So every person, okay, the wealth per person was $160,000. So it went from 16 to 160. So while the expenditures were going up, the desirability of the town and the prices of the houses had increased significantly more rapidly than any of the expenditures, which is an interesting fact. The other part is it would look a lot the same. Okay, the town looked not that much different than it did in 50. The dominant buildings were still the same ones. The arterials look similar because those houses had existed before, and what had happened was houses were being built in the woods. The deck houses and all of the developments had occurred. Okay, so population increased 450%. The town budgets had increased, but there's still some core values: education, the way the town looked and felt, and conservation, and the center of the community. Now let's go forward a little bit more to right now. Okay, in 2017. The population had gone up 37%. It had gone up from that 3,900 to about 5,300, which is a lot, 37, but it's nothing like the growth happened between 50, and 80. That's where the explosive growth happened. But it's stabilizing now. Okay, the growth, the town right now, population is fairly stable at just over 5,000. Okay, it goes from 5,100, and it goes up and down by year, by the way. Okay, and there's a lot of, the town is aging, and a lot of that other generation is not living with the parents now, and there's less younger people. Okay, to talk about that specifically, there's two cohorts that are really, really interesting. If you look at the cohort of people from 25 to 45, sort of the prime child raising years, okay, and the cohort of people over 65. In 1990, and this is even closer, 1980, late 80s, 90, there were about 1,400 people in the child raising years and 600 in the over 65. And right now, it's exactly the opposite. There are 1,300 in the over 65 age range, 13, 14, depending, the number, all these numbers are a year off because the reports aren't, and 600 in the child raising stage. So it's a change, okay? The town is older, and subsequently the town is wealthier, okay? It is hard, as you know, for young people to afford the prices to come and move into this place. The school has stabilized. The school population is about 600 and is stabilized around there, okay? At the school, we would still say that there should be a disproportionate number of awards go to Carlisle kids, but nobody really knows because right now everybody gets an award, okay? So that's hard to tell, okay? The great issues, as I look at it, are not about growth right now. They're sort of about quality of life and the way we want to live. We wanted to have a school project. It was not for rapid growth of population. We wanted to have better schools, okay? We're talking, the issues that are in the town warrant are issues about noise. Okay, there are issues about communications department so we can respond better in terms of the citizenry. Okay, so I call this sort of phase gentrification and affluence. Okay, the town is a reasonably different feel to it than it did in 1985. We still, however, are focused on preservation. Okay, the amount of the town right now is up to about 34% that's protected that'll never be built on. Most of the building lots that are reasonable have been built out, okay? There's an enormous discussion related to affordable housing where the town is resisting. The town has chosen to resist significant affordable housing and try to deal with that in different ways, whether it be legal or whether they use the land for a different kind of smaller housing. But those issues won't go away. So if we look at the numbers are sort of interesting. The expenditures of the town in the most recent year, I had the numbers for $27 million, are about 5,145. So they haven't really changed that much, okay? That the per person expenditures are on an individual basis are pretty much the same. What has changed is the wealth as represented by the houses. The property in the town now is worth a little over $1.5 billion. And that's over $271,000 per person. And remember, there are multiple people in a lot of these households. That's extraordinary, okay? It has rapidly outpaced the expenditures per town. And there's a lot of issues related to that, but that's kind of where we are. The town still, however, looks very similar. It has the look and feel of a small town. There's no traffic lights. There probably never will be any traffic lights in the town. The minimal signage. That a lot of the town is protected, particularly on arterial. So there's been this focus on preserving the way the town looks and preserving the land. There's an enormous focus on the library and ongoing education, and there's a continuing focus on the schools. And I think the town has really maintained a sense of small town community values. So what does that mean? If you look at all of that, why did all that happen? Okay, it's hard to, we all have probably ideas. Why did we go from this small farming town that was not dissimilar to hundreds of other small farming towns within the sort of the 495 belt, okay, and around there. There are many, many towns that look the same or similar in 1950, but not all of them developed, both in terms of the way they looked and economically, the way Carlisle did. And Why is that? I offer some things. Location was really important. We're near really good transportation, a lot of really good highways, but we're not on any of those, okay, which is a real asset, okay? You can get to the city in 35 minutes, but we're not directly on a major highway, okay? I think that location, also the location and the proximity to Concord is really important. Concord is obviously a desirable town, and I think we all find it wonderful. And being near Concord, and being near Boston, by the way, during this period, in terms of the major universities, the healthcare, et cetera, in terms of the growth that generated was really positive. I can't emphasize enough the early decisions related to the zoning, the 1 acre and then 2 acres, and the restrictions on commercial by some extraordinarily far-sighted people were very instrumental in making the way. Now, those decisions were based on water, and when we talk about some issues, that might be a significant issue for the future, but those were amazing decisions that were made by some far-looking people early on. The decision to affiliate with Concord on the schools was really important, and it could have gone either way. Through the 30s, 40s, there were notions that we would affiliate with a consortium from Chelmsford and Billerica, and the kids went on a tuition basis to Concord, which people argued about in terms of the rate for a long time. But the decision, which happened in the early 60s, to do the regional district with Concord-Carlisle was an extraordinarily good one. That's one of the most highly regarded high schools in the state, and which both communities contribute to, by the way. The consistent and constant protection of the environment was a key thing, okay? You all know this. When you drive in here, it just looks and feels different, okay? It's the thing we love about it. And it wasn't an accident. That took a lot of focus by a lot of people on a continuing basis in order to make that happen. As well as the commitment to education. The town has consistently supported what is necessary to do to have the best possible schools. And then I always talk I always say it's either chance or luck about, for some reason, Carlisle became attractive to a group of highly educated engineers from MIT and scientists from Harvard and high-level professionals across the board that found Carlisle, the privacy and nature of Carlisle, so close to the city, very attractive. So a number of them moved in, they told other people, more of them moved in, and it became a place that was well known, both in MIT and Harvard circles, as a place if you want somewhere rural that has accessibility to the city, it's good. So there's a number of reasons. Some of them chance, some of them location, but a lot of them related to some really good decisions by some people that we should be extremely grateful to in terms of the zoning, the commitment to education, and the commitment to the land conservation. Now at the end, the last thing I talk about is what does it mean going forward? Okay, we are at this position. What are the challenges? I think we have to think about whether, both from a financial standpoint and sort of a cultural standpoint, Carlisle will continue to be attractive to young families. Okay, does it cost too much, one, and two, are young families going to want to be near center of the action? Okay, we see some evidence of that, but I see some evidence not. There's a lot of young families that aspire to continue to move out to the woods. I think water is huge, okay, and climate is huge. Okay, the last drought was dangerous. Okay, we were getting close to water issues on several properties, and I think some experienced some. I don't think it'll be the last drought, okay, given the way the climate is going. So that'll be, for the future, that's going to be a significant focus of people's attention, okay. The volunteer spirit, the cost of living here, often requires 2 people to work in the younger households, okay? When 2 people work, we run the town on a core of I still say we, I live in Concord. The town is run by a core of 250 dedicated volunteers, and which change, but in many ways remain the same. Will we be able to maintain that with a younger population where both spouses are working? It's very, very hard for them to do that level of commitment when both spouses are working. I think it's a real challenge. I think that housing laws will continue to be a challenge. Massachusetts will continue to experience very big pressure on affordable housing for the workers that we'll need, and that pressure will come out of the cities and continue to come at the suburban towns. Okay, it's not going to go away. Okay, we're going to be dealing with that for a long time. On the good side of things, I think we're near a point of equilibrium related to the population, which should take a little bit of the pressure off of the money side of things. I know people who have been here a long time, you say these numbers about wealth, but they say, well, what about incomes for people who are on a fixed income? And that's a real issue. There are a lot of people who really want to continue to live here, but find that expenses as they get older higher than they can contemplate. I think the town is starting to think about housing, a different kind of housing, a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to maintain, a little bit cheaper to maintain. That could be very beneficial in that regard. But I'm pretty optimistic about the spirit of this community. I think that the momentum of that commitment to education, the momentum of the commitment to the conservation, and really seeing people continue to step up to the volunteer environment, I'm pretty optimistic. So that's the story. We had this little town, a little farming town, not unlike other towns. Now it's an affluent town that is beautiful. It's committed to education, and it's committed to preserving that. And those are just some ideas on why that happened and some observations of the future. If anybody has any questions or observations, yeah.
Well, as one interested in geography and town variety, particularly in Massachusetts, and especially in light of a very anti-environmental federal government now, where lands that were considered totally safe are now going to be opened up for drilling and things like that. I've even noticed in Massachusetts the difference between towns that have been opening up for more and more development and Carlisle being able to resist that. But I'm worried about more pressure from the pro-develop type people, often younger ones coming in with big families, wanting to have more schools, more convenience, rather than preserving the land, as you mentioned some wise people very much did in the 1950s. Do you think we can hold the line on keeping the conservation land permanent, or is there going to be pressure to undo some of that?
I think it would be extraordinarily hard to undo. The way it has been set up in the conservation land, it would be very extraordinarily hard to undo that. Okay, in terms of, there will be pressure. Where the pressure will be is the remaining small tracts of land, which are not huge, but there are some. People are going to want to sell those, and those will be decisions that are, and there are going to be there's often another generation of a family who wants to maximize the income related to selling those, and very often there are conflicts within families related to that decision. Fortunately, to date, we've been lucky that many of those land sales have been executed by people who love the town and want to preserve as much of that as possible. We still see that, and we've seen 2 or 3 in the last 2 years. So I'm pretty optimistic about. I mean, I think what you don't want is the weird aberrations. You don't want somebody to sell to a 40B person and have something that's totally out of the context of what Carlisle is, and those are going to be the difficult ones. Any other questions? question? Yeah.
When was that figure the opposite of what it is now, the 600, 1,400 figure?
The numbers are, the two sets of numbers are from 1990 and 2016.
Right, yeah, that's extraordinary. And so from the Council on Aging point of view, what we're seeing, just in the 5.5, closing in on 6 years I've been here, we're trying to do the same number of programs that we've done over the years, and Angela's even been able to expand it, and we're lucky that we have this wonderful opportunity to be in St. Irene and Union Hall at FRS and Congregational Church. But in the office, what's happening there is, when we started tracking our calls, we were doing about 350, 340, 360 maybe, somewhere in that mid-300s calls, both incoming and outgoing per month. And then it went, a year later, it went into the 400s, and then 2 years later, it went into the 500s, and this past year, it crossed 600 calls per month.
Yeah.
And so this is why we're seriously looking at the infrastructure.
Yeah, oh, I totally hear that. I think that I personally am the Carlisle needs the right kind for Carlisle of a community or center for aging, okay? It needs that.
And so just to finish a point, because I so appreciate everything that you're bringing to the table here, I want everybody here to know, why is it significant that we would be holding some of our events up in a centralized spot versus here? The significance is that our offices would be down the hall. So we could actually do our work, be able to answer the phones, help people out, and still come down the hall and sit and have lunch with you guys, or do a program, as opposed to sending Angela or other members of the staff out to do things and then coming back and still having this.
Yeah, it's not confined to the Council on Aging, by the way. I often joke we should change the name of the fire department to the ambulance department. It's 90% of the work of the fire department is the responses in the ambulance. Okay, and at that charts almost directly to that cohort that we talked about. The aging population uses the ambulances more, which is perfectly natural. You have to adapt to that. The funding, the replacement of the ambulance, the funding of the Council on Aging. They're going to be rising expenses. Any other? Yeah.
Some time ago, I remember reading that if the town ever peaked out with all the possible buildable lots, even funds sold, that it would peak out at 7,500 population with an average of 2.5 people per household.
Yeah.
Is that still?
I personally think that's a little high. I mean, I think we're, it depends on how they're going to get around, if they can get around the zoning with the 40B, okay? That if we continue the same pattern, that we're fairly aggressive, number one, legally, and number two, in terms of alternative development that is town-friendly, I think those numbers are high. You all know there's a lot of really marginable building lot, potential building lots in town. And I think when the developers come and they realize what they're going to be up against in terms of our strong regulations and the expenses of building on some of these places, I just don't think it's that high.
An observation that I have in terms of why the town has sort of mushroomed. I think there's two things. One is that the expansion of Route 2 going right into Cambridge really helped in terms of the commute to
That the commutes,
a lot of people, I mean, I work in Cambridge,
yeah.
and as Route 2 got expanded.
Yeah, one other thing, another aspect to that, people say there's very little business in town. Well, that's not exactly true. There's a lot of business going down in these big houses, okay? There are many, many, many professionals that are doing a significant part of their work in their homes in Carlisle now, and the technology is, so it's not as, it's not as clear cut as, any other questions, observations? It's an extraordinary place. We miss it a lot. We were here every week for church, not here, but at FRS at church, and come over for a lot of volunteer things. I was heavily involved with the paper, so I'll always be involved with Carlisle. I think it's an amazing place, an amazing community, but we like also being near a little village in West Concord too. So, but I love Carlisle. We'll be buried here. Any other?